I am somewhat fortunate in that I live in an interesting architectural area of the United States. No, I'm not talking about New York or San Francisco, I'm talking about DC. Yeah, DC has its ugly share of buildings, but it's also one of the few places where you can see neoclassical revivals down the street from brutalist monoliths. I don't even like brutalism, and I find this building impressive. But there's more to it than that. There's the French Second Empire style of the Eisenhower Executive Office building, the 19th century look of the Forest Service building, whose clock tower I have been inside, and the Romanesque revival of the old post office. The surrounding countryside even has homes rendered lovingly in dozens of styles, especially in certain parts of Alexandria. But I won't show you those because people live there and that would be creepy. The thing I see when looking at these buildings isn't just their architectural beauty. I see an old phrase the so-called greatest generation was fond of. They just don't build them like they used to. I suppose this is another bit of blame we can lay at the feet of the boomers, though there is a certain kind of logic to it. Buildings are expensive, elaborate buildings even more so. Why not reduce the central burden on the taxpayer with cheaper, easier to maintain buildings? The not-so-greatest generation even took this a step further, stopping to build government buildings altogether, instead relying on leasing space from privately held businesses. There's problems with that, but we'll leave that for another video. Here's the first office I had when working at the Department of Justice, in an older building near the courthouse. And here's the second office I had at DOJ in a newly built building near NOMA. Sorry for the quality of that second photo, it was taken at like 2 o'clock in the morning, long story. These buildings aren't fabulous or flashy by any means, but they are serviceable. Plenty of good working space to write reports and fill out paperwork and all that other government nonsense we get up to. After all, taxes and the government budget are bad enough. Why should John and Susie Q taxpayer foot the bill for government employees to work in beautiful places? I've worked in everything from bar kitchens to gas station convenience stores, and let me tell you, those places were not pretty. Why should the government get any better? Well, there are two reasons for that. For starters, better buildings attract better employees. Those two buildings I worked at for DOJ were perfectly fine, but they were also kinda lame. The first one had this old, sweaty feel to it, the result of decades in a humid swamp with little renovation. The second felt cold and cheap, like plastic packaging. One thing I will say is we were all skeptical of the furniture as it was built by Unicor, i.e. federal prisons. But it was actually pretty good. Compare that to these shots. These were taken at USDA's headquarters where I worked for 2 years. This building is also impossibly old and certainly has its less presentable sections, but it is undeniably beautiful in a way those glass-covered office buildings never could be. There was a certain kind of pride in working in such an amazing building. To be fair to both agencies, the DOJ main building, which I have been in on several occasions but did not have an office in, is just as beautiful, and both buildings have striking murals that are worth seeing. But that's because both of those buildings date back to a time when citizens actually cared for how their buildings looked, when they wanted to build things that were worth building, to make structures they could be proud of as citizens, rather than what was simply cheapest. And that leads me to my second point. We should build better buildings because they're ours. Shouldn't we want them to look nice? This is the post office of my hometown. There's nothing wrong with it. The drab exterior certainly gets the job done. But I don't think anyone would call it beautiful. There really isn't much of an architectural aesthetic to my hometown other than it cheap and serviceable. That's what happens when you grow up in lower income areas. But it doesn't have to be that way. We, the citizenry, could have built anything there, could have made it look like anything other than a boring rundown box. Compare the train stations. Some might find beauty in the brutalism Art Deco stylings of Metro Center on L'Enfant Plaza, but no one will find beauty in the Vienna or Huntington stations. The DC Metro stations don't even have bathrooms, for Christ's sakes, and no, I will never stop complaining about that. Their beauty hardly compares to Grand Central in New York or Union Station in DC. Sure, it would be unreasonable to expect every metro stop to be this beautiful, but there's no reason they have to be drab concrete or cheap glass. Will all of this be more expensive? Absolutely. Does it mean increased taxes? Probably. It's not like the rich are going to pay for it. But there will be benefits. The extra money spent will attract talent to the government sector. I mean, just imagine working in a building that was as beautiful as the Eisenhower Building or the old post office. It won't fix a crappy job, but it does make those jobs suck just a little bit less. Those better environments attracting better talent in turn means better everything for the government. You may think of government employees as no better than a waste of your taxes, but those are the same people designing all those forms you have to fill out and all the Byzantine regulations that you have to follow. Don't you want those forms and regulations made by the best people, the most talented? Someday I'll get around to doing a whole video on why we need to pay government workers more, not less, but that's for another day. And it's not just about government workers, it's about us too. We aren't going to convince businesses to stop putting up generic 1+5s, strip malls, and glass office buildings. We can at least make the public buildings something worth looking at. We should all get to live in beautiful neighborhoods and take part in beautiful places. From the New York Public Library to my post office. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you can support the channel by buying my stories on Google Play. I make these videos as advertising for my writing, so if you want me to keep making them, buy my books. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.